Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Rita Pobaluzwi, and you're most welcome to this conversation today. What caught my attention this week in the Mmegi newspaper is an article titled Outrage Breaks in SA over Botswana Veggie Restriction. Essentially, this article is in reference to South African farmers who are essentially expressing their displeasure, their disgruntlement towards these vegetable restrictions that Botswana and Namibia typically impose. Now, based on this article and other research that I've seen, Botswana and Namibia specifically tend to implement these vegetable restrictions in order to kind of protect the local farmers. And because of the pressure that the Botswana and Namibian governments are facing from local farmers who are saying, we want an opportunity to be able to fill this gap in agricultural production. We want an opportunity to be able to provide food that we produce in Botswana to the local market. But so South African farmers, on the other hand, are complaining to say, Botswana, when we produce our vegetables, when we grow our agricultural production, we have you in mind. We cater for you because we understand that you are not able to meet the market demand, right? As you can see, it's easy to see both sides of the story, right? It's easy to see why the South African farmers are disgruntled, and it is also easy to see why the Namibian and Botswana farmers are also disgruntled, right? Ultimately, I wanted to talk about this story because it's not just about the vegetable restrictions. It's about much broader issues that are perpetually keeping Botswana in a state of food insecurity. From my personal experience living in Botswana, I'm very aware that when these vegetable restrictions happen, one of the things that we complain about as consumers is the quality, the quantity, and the consistency that we get from the local farmers. I'm not blaming the local farmers, but I'm saying that is the scenario. What happens is that the quality of the vegetables are not good, the quantity is not sustainable, and therefore, consistency wise, they don't typically fill that gap very well. I'm not blaming the farmers. I will say this again. I'm not blaming the local farmers, but I'm saying there's definitely a gap for improvement there, right? And as I was reading about this whole vegetable restriction, which typically happens, it's not a new thing, it's not the first time it's occurring, and it probably won't be the last time it's occurring. But what I agree with when it comes to the vice president of Botswana, Ndaba Kgaolate, is that anytime we have these vegetable restrictions, the people who are most affected are those who have minimal means of survival. Now, we know this because even during COVID, I remember there was a very, what do we call these? We had very tight restrictions in terms of movement of people and goods. But even at that time, if you had money, you could purchase whatever you needed, despite the travel restrictions, right? Despite the bans that were imposed, if you had the means, you could buy what you wanted, right? So this is why the VP is right to say this is not a people-friendly regulation. This is not an ordinary people-friendly regulation, right? Ordinary people, the ones with little means, are the ones who bear the brunt of these vegetable restrictions, right? But what is also interesting is that this issue of vegetable tariffs speaks to the larger problem that Botswana is facing. Botswana is facing severe food insecurity. I say severe because even during COVID, it was very clear when there were these travel restrictions on foods and goods, when there were these restrictions on food and goods, that Botswana was immediately in a crisis, right? We were immediately in a crisis because when we are not getting these goods or foods or cereals from South Africa or Zimbabwe or other nations that are providing for us, we are immediately in a crisis. So there are two things that I think are possible here. One one option, one possibility is that South African farmers can partner with Botswana farmers, right? Perhaps South African farmers go to Botswana, for example, short-term, long-term projects that they can initiate where they actually transfer some of their skills. And then the other issue is that Botswana is not like South Africa when it comes to the environment. Botswana is a desert area, right? Namibia is a desert area. So these two countries have an issue that is broader than just lack of skill. They also have an issue of lack of water in the environment, right? In the case of Botswana, Botswana is landlocked and we don't have as much water within the country. And in fact, according to research, Botswana is one of the 25 countries that are experiencing 80% of water stress. Globally, Botswana is one of the 25 countries that are experiencing a form of water stress, right? Botswana is in the list with countries such as Bahrain. Now, the difference between Botswana and Bahrain is that Bahrain has resorted to circumvent this water shortage by using a method called hydroponic farming, right? So Bahrain is resorting to this method called hydroponic farming in order to mitigate this water shortage, right? And Botswana, in the previous government, also did benchmarking exercises in Israel in order to learn how Israel, another desert area, has been able to circumvent crop production, how they've been able to boost crop production using alternative farming methods. So I'm very aware that Botswana has been conducting these benchmarking exercises, not only for agriculture, for other sectors as well, but specifically in context to agriculture. Botswana has been benchmarking with Israel in order to see how Israel is managing to produce vegetables in a desert environment, right? And interestingly, the current administration, the new history making administration, has also been in these benchmarking exercises, right? I saw a newspaper article on the Daily News Botswana where the Minister of Agriculture or somebody is in these benchmarking exercises, right, in order to kind of improve agricultural production. The question I have is, since 2017, when the previous government was benchmarking with Israel, what has actually happened, right? And if something has happened, how are we still not able to fill the gaps, right? So it's a question of priorities, right? So this story is much bigger than just this vegetable restriction. It speaks to the issue of priorities for government, right? It speaks to the issue of priorities for us in the private sector. What is government doing and what are we doing as private sector people to fill this gap? There is an obvious gap, right? So it's not just about a lack of skills. It's not just about not having a conducive environment for agricultural production, but it's an accumulation of factors that is actually causing us to find ourselves perpetually in a state of food insecurity in Botswana, right? So this is definitely a story that speaks to opportunities that we can take, not only as a government, but as private sector. One of the things that stood out when I was doing more research about this topic of water shortage is that water retention strategies are not as expensive as they're made out to seem. So it's not a cost issue, because that is typically what people will say, oh, these methods are very expensive. How are they expensive in comparison and in contrast to having such high levels of food insecurity in the country, right? Botswana's food import bill is massive. So ultimately, investing in these alternative farming methods for agricultural production can actually help to circumvent these costs that we cry about. Alrighty, my friend, I thank you so much for popping by. I hope you are having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you're having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.